As the Russia-Ukraine conflict approaches its third year, Europe finds itself at a crossroads. In the wake of the United States President Donald Trump's peace talks with Russia without the involvement of the Ukrainian side, French President Emmanuel Macron has called for an emergency summit. European leaders will meet to discuss their continent's role in securing peace. Can Europe present a unified front, or will divisions continue to hamper efforts? What role can Europe play in supporting Ukraine, and how will the shifting dynamics in the US-Russia relations impact the future of the conflict? Welcome. European leaders plan to meet on how they might influence talks that could determine the future of Ukraine and of Europe's security landscape. In this context, the Washington Post highlighted that as the Trump administration moves towards direct talks with Russian officials over the war, French President Emmanuel Macron has called European leaders to an emergency meeting to discuss how they might influence the talks. Additionally, Trump's phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday and US plans to hold talks with Russian officials this week have fueled European concerns that their defense interests will be sidelined. As European leaders meet in Paris to discuss the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the growing rift between the United States and Europe over the peace talks has raised concerns about Europe's future role in the negotiations.
France is hosting an urgent summit with key European leaders, including German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, to discuss the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict and European security. The summit follows remarks from US-Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, who excluded Europe from any peace talks aimed at ending the conflict with Russia. This has raised questions about Europe's influence on the peace process and whether the continent can form a united front to support Ukraine. The Trump administration has been intensifying efforts to end the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This comes after President Donald Trump revealed he had a lengthy phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, during which they agreed to begin negotiations to end the conflict. In response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine will not agree to any peace deal that excludes the country from negotiations. Additionally, US Vice President J.D. Vance, in his speech at the Munich Security Conference, did not address Ukraine, which was expected to be a key topic at the event. In his own address at the conference, Zelensky called for the creation of an army of Europe, asserting that the old relationship between Europe and the US was ending, and that Europe must take on a more active role. Meanwhile, the US announced that peace talks would be held in Saudi Arabia. The French summit will explore Europe's potential role in securing peace, including the possibility of offering security guarantees to Ukraine, as the war enters its third year. This summit could be a defining moment for Europe's future role in the conflict, in contrast to the role of the US.
And for more analysis, we are joined from London by Nicholas Williams, from NATO official, a former NATO official, and from Kiev by Oleksiy Melniak, co-director, Foreign Relations and International Security Programs. Sir, if I mentioned your name wrong, please, sorry, and you can mention your name. Okay, I'll start off with Mr. Williams. With France hosting his emergency summit, or this emergency summit, do you think Europe is finally stepping up to be on the forefront of negotiation an end to the Ukrainian, or negotiating an end to the Ukrainian-Russian conflict? And do you think Europe could replace the US as the main supporter for Ukraine?
No, this whole process is chaotic. Um, President Trump has a phone call with Putin, and they're going to have negotiations. Who's going to sign an agreement? Uh, the Ukrainians are not involved, or at least tangentially. The Europeans at this Paris summit are not involved. Are they going to provide troops? For what purpose? I think it's really chaotic and confusing, and I can't see any good coming out of this, except that the Europeans realize that, not that they needed reminding, that President Trump has a contempt for them and has a disdain for them, and he'll ignore them until the last minute.
Okay, Mr. Milink, the United States has been taking a unilateral approach in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Do you think Europe has been sidelined in the broader peace process? And what are the implications of this happening or taking place at this point?
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, you described perfectly in general what is going on, and our guest from London as well added some important details. There is a big concern in Kyiv that at a certain moment, President Trump, Donald Trump, will present Ukrainian president a kind of list of requirements that Ukraine has to fulfill, agreed by two big powers. Yes, there is such a concern. On the other hand, I think it's too early to get kind of panic feeling, because we saw already that Volodymyr Zelensky has refused a kind offer from Washington regarding Ukrainian natural resources. So there is a possibility that if something agreed without Ukraine and doesn't fit even minimal expectation of Ukraine, not President Zelensky, I repeat, but Ukraine as a nation, that the probability of working out such a decision is rather low.
Okay, sir, Mr. Williams mentioned that what's taking place is chaotic. What's your take, sir, on his comment? And of course, if you want to answer him, please do.
Yes, indeed, it's probably one of the best descriptions of what is going on. It's chaotic, and the top news of the weekend was the Munich conference. And I think that Americans, new officials from the new administration, look like students that had an exam and they were not prepared for that exam, because the vice president was supposed to speak about the main topic, which is the process, which was the Russian-Ukrainian war, and instead he talked about something that not related to the subject. He was provoking European partners, and one American official said something controversial to what another American official just mentioned before, and even the same people, they would probably try to correct themselves just in a matter of one day.
So, sir, you both stand on the same ground that the situation is chaotic. Mr. Williams, how do you assess the impact of the US excluding Europe from direct peace talks with Russia? And does this undermine Europe's influence in the conflict?
Well, it poses a real problem for Europe. If President Trump, in his discussions with President Putin, wants to propose a European force to reassure the Ukrainians, that they're not being abandoned. Well, how can President Trump, propose that without the approval of the Europeans? I'm reminded of the Balkan Wars in the 1990s and the careful preparation that went into a peace negotiation and peace treaty. And so I return to my phrase, it's chaotic because there is no preparation for what is going to happen next. President Trump thinks he's the master of the deal and he can get a deal with President Putin, but how is it going to be implemented?
Without Ukraine, how is it going to be implemented without Ukraine and the European
exactly.
nations?
Exactly.
Okay, Mr. Milinki, of course, the same question. How do you assess the impact of the US excluding Europe from the direct peace talks with Russia? And does this undermine Europe's influence in the conflict? Are you okay with what Mr. Williams just said?
I strongly agree with Mr. Williams, and with all my practical experience being in the military in peacekeeping operations and working for Ministry of Defense or now for the think tank, I simply don't see any practical proposal so far. And the only what is clear for the moment that Donald Trump has an idea in his mind to stop the war. And then I'm afraid that not, or like in his own plan, he would probably try to support Vladimir Putin's plan. And this is not the plan to end the war. This is plan to destroy Ukraine, to occupy Ukraine. That's why I don't think that it's going to work. And secondly, what I mentioned already, any plan that doesn't meet even minimal Ukrainian objectives, Ukraine will most probably will reject. And especially in the situation when there is at least declaration of very strong support by our other Western European and not just European partners.
Okay, France's summit is seen as an attempt to counterbalance the US influence. As Trump started talks with Russia without Ukrainian participation, what role can France and other European nations play in pushing for peace talks that prioritize Ukraine's interests at this point, which is very important, because if we need to negotiate, then we have to have a round table for negotiation, and all the parties that are in this conflict should be together in this negotiation.
Is the question for Kyiv?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. What we see for the moment that Europe is trying to find a solution, and from our point of view, from Kyiv, Europe needs a leader. Someone's gonna take a lead, because it's nice to have equal people around the table, but there must be one leader. And we don't know who is going to take this very responsible role for the moment. The second...
Who do you think, sir, is most likely to be responsible for this mission? Or to be responsible of this leadership at this point? Which is a very critical point as we talk now. It's Ukraine, it's US President Donald Trump, it's Vladimir Putin, and on top of all, of course, the French summit that's taking place to show the position of the European nations.
Currently, it seems that the French President Emmanuel Macron, he's hosting the meeting. It was his initiative, and he actually, during last 12 or 18 months, made some very strong initiatives like deployment of French troops on some parts of Ukrainian territory, not taking part in the hostilities, but this kind of very big initiatives. So most probably for the moment, at least, he is leading this meeting, and unfortunately, the formal structures like
which is good gesture, sir, that he's leading this meeting.
Yes, but as I said, there is formal structures like European Union, where United States are not present. That's logically there should be European Union, but European Union is divided nowadays, especially taking positions of Prime Minister of Hungary and Slovak Prime Minister. There is no unity. Therefore,
okay, I'll be back to I'll leave you there, and I'll be back again, Mr. Williams. French President Macron has called this summit to solidify Europe's position. What concrete actions do you expect European leaders would take to show support for Ukraine at this point?
Well, it's difficult to see what concrete action can be taken. A military force has to apply an agreement and implement an agreement which is not yet made. I personally think that Macron is considering this summit as a political response to Trump's initiative. And I think the most important question is, will this group of European countries, which is not the whole of the EU, but will this group of European countries pledge themselves to support Ukraine with money, with equipment, until there is a peace agreement signed by Ukraine? Not Trump, but by Ukraine. And that's all in the realm of confusion. It's not, nothing is clear.
Exactly, sir. Mr. Williams, how could the dynamics change so fast when the United States supposedly was the main ally of Ukraine, and now everything is upside down and turning tables is so easy, and now the European nations are taking over and they're handling the summits, and what's going on?
Well, I think it just underlines the fact that President Trump has no regard for his European allies. He holds them in contempt. And I think going into
only
this
sir for the European allies.
Well, what Trump wants is the European allies to do more for their own defense under the watchful eye of the United States. So he will spend less money on defending Europe, but he will want to control what the Europeans do from afar. And that is not feasible. Either the United States are part of NATO or it's not a part of NATO. And
True,
this is a real crisis for transatlantic relations. It's beyond Ukraine. It's a very strategic moment in the history of Europe.
Mr. Milke, with Russia and the US holding talks without Ukraine's involvement, what kind of peace deal could emerge, and how could this affect Ukraine's position?
It's a 1 million question, because what is clear for the moment is the Russian position declared several times by Putin and his officials, and actually it is unrealistic because, just for example, Russia demands Ukraine to leave the territories which Russia declared as annexed territories, but in fact doesn't control. Demilitarization, like dismantling Ukrainian defense capabilities, etc., regarding language, religion, and internal policies. And there is we didn't hear any preconditions voiced by Donald Trump. So I don't know whether Donald Trump is going to accept all the Russian demands. It seems unrealistic, and I hope I'm not wrong. So hopefully there will be some concessions actually made on the Russian side, but so far we haven't heard any declaration that Russia is going to make any goodwill gesture, goodwill step towards peace negotiations.
So how will there be a goodwill when there's one main important party that's not there and does not exist, which is Ukraine?
Well, we are talking about the US-Russia meeting or negotiations, and I
Negotiations
think
has to comprise Ukraine, sir, to reach a resolution.
No, I mean, if Ukraine is or Russia or rather Russian-Ukrainian war is one of the topics on the agenda, that's fine. But if they want to agree something to impose on Ukraine, this is a wrong approach. And I fully understand your question, but now we have to separate sometimes Trump-Putin's meeting and negotiations about a resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian
Got your
war.
point. Mr. Williams, the EU has struggled with cohesion in its response to the war. What do you think it will take for Europe to form a more unified approach, sir?
Well, I don't think Europe is in a condition to have a unified approach. The British...
Sir, why are you so pessimistic?
Why am I so pessimistic?
Yes.
Because I think Europe has depended on the United States for so long that every country will take its own view about its relationship to the United States.
Then whose mistake is this, sir?
Well, I think Ukraine is something that unites Europe, but not militarily. No, not all Europeans want to go into Ukraine, boots on the ground, to support Ukraine and reassure Ukraine. The Germans and possibly even the Poles don't want to do that. And if the Germans aren't interested in sending troops to Ukraine, whatever the peace deal entails, then Europe is not united. You can't unite Europe without Germany.
Okay, Mr. Milnky, the EU has had difficulty presenting a united front on the war. What steps can the EU take to strengthen its collective response and avoid fragmentation, sir?
I think that indeed there is a problem of unity within the European Union, and now we see within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Therefore, I think that the best way that European leaders are willing to take responsibility of the European future, about the European security and stability, is to look for like-minded nations to create coalition of the willing. And for me, this is the only way to do things nowadays. And fortunately, there is quite a strong number of countries that I think could join the coalition and contribute to this coalition, either financially or politically.
Got you, sir. Mr. Nicholas Williams, 10 seconds. Final words, please.
I don't have any confidence in this negotiating procedure.
Unfortunately, sir.
Unfortunately.
Okay, that was Oleski Milinki, co-director of Foreign Relations and International Security Program at the Razumokov Center, and Nicholas Williams, former NATO official. Thank you very much for your informative and valuable knowledge and insights. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.